The first lesson in chapter 12 was all about sampling. Today's lesson is talking about the types of bias that can exist when we are doing sampling and surveying. So let's talk about what goes into a good, valid survey. So a valid survey, you should know what you want to know or learn. Don't make a survey unless you know exactly what information you're trying to gather. Make sure you use the right sample or respondents. We talked about last lesson, convenience sampling is bad. Make sure you use a method that is good. Ask the right questions. Okay, there is a such thing as wording things inappropriately. So learning how to ask the right questions so that you get fair results is important. Be sure the survey is not too long. If it's too long, you're going to have people who get bored and don't want to participate anymore. Make sure you ask specific rather than general questions. Yes and no questions, true and false, or ones that have specific choices to choose from are the best types of questions. When you just ask somebody, what is your opinion, you're giving them too much room to answer. We like to ask for quantitative results when possible. Not always the case. It is possible. If you want to know somebody's gender, that's male or female. But quantitative results can be analyzed better than categorical data. So if you can ask for something quantitative, that's always best. Be careful on how you phrase the question. That's something we're going to talk about, is looking at phrasing and making sure that you don't use what's called loaded words, words that have emotions attached to them. Be careful in phrasing the answers. Okay? Multiple choice is much better than free response, because if you give them multiple choice, then you can control what they choose. And sometimes it's good to give a pilot survey to a small group of people. Before you even give your survey to your sample, have just a couple of people take it. That way you can avoid any errors that might be with your large group. If people complain it's too long, you can fix that before you give it to the group that you're really studying. So those are some things when you're creating a good survey that you want to make sure you include. So let's talk about all of the various errors that can come with sampling and errors that can create bias. So the first type of sampling error is what's called voluntary response sample. This is when a large group of individuals are invited to respond, and all who do respond are included in the results. These samples are often biased because the problem is typically those with strong opinions or who are strongly motivated, those are usually the only ones who answer. If you offer an invitation to a large group and it's not something that's of interest to them, they may not respond. And the other issue that comes with this is your sample is not necessarily representative of the population. So that invalidates your survey. In other words, you can't draw conclusions if you have an invalid survey or an invalid sample group. So that's one type of sample that can cause bias. The next type of sample that can cause bias is the one that we talked about. Convenience sampling is terrible, okay, because people are chosen conveniently. You're not getting a good representation of the entire population. Another thing that might be an issue is a poor sampling frame. Okay, remember, the sampling frame is the people that we are choosing from. So if your sampling frame is incomplete, in other words, it doesn't include all of the people in your population, you can end up with bias. If our population was Hazelwood West High School, but I only made a list out of the freshman and sophomore to choose from, you're losing half of the opinions of the school. And freshman opinions can be different than senior opinions. Undercoverage. Okay, undercoverage is where some portion of the population is not selected at all, or has a smaller representation in the sample than it has in the population. If you decide to break our school into grade levels, but you only choose 5 freshmen and then you choose 30 sophomores, juniors, and seniors, that's undercoverage because your freshmen are not being properly represented. Choosing percentages rather than raw numbers can help with that problem. Undercoverage also exists with convenience sampling. If you are only sampling people at a mall, the group that's not being represented are the people who aren't at the mall, who don't like shopping, and their opinions, again, might be different than the opinions of the people you are asking. So undercoverage is a very common bias. We also have non-response bias. This is when people are asked to participate in a survey, but they choose not to respond. People who go door to door asking people to take surveys, they get this a lot because people don't have to open the door. They can open the door and say, I'm not interested. If you're calling them on a phone, they might hang up. This creates bias again because those who don't respond, their opinion might be different than the people who do. So non-response can kind of go with undercoverage as well. Okay, non-response can occur when a survey is also too long and people just simply don't want to spend too much time on that survey. Another type of bias is response bias. This is very different. This is when something in the survey that you designed influences people's responses. Okay? For example, the wording of a question might influence someone to choose a specific response. There might be words that draw on people's emotions that might make them lean one way over another. So response is not what people are responding, it's what you created, and the response is because of what you created in your survey. So we're going to go through several examples. This first example, we are listing the sampling method, and then is there any potential sources of bias? So a question was posted on the Lycos website on June 18th, 2000, and it asked visitors to the site to say whether they thought marijuana should be legally available for medicinal purposes. So, what kind of sampling is this? Well, we're only looking at people, the only people who are answering the question are those that went to that website. So, that is convenience sampling. Okay, convenience is when we're only reaching a small group. We are only reaching the people that are on the Lycos website at that time. That can cause all kinds of bias. It can be biased because you might only get responses from people who have strong opinions about marijuana. You might only get responses from people who are searching about marijuana. You're going to miss out on all of those responses on people who maybe are very much against it or don't have opinions either way. Let's look at the next one. Hoping to learn what issues may resonate with voters in the coming election, the campaign director for a mayoral candidate selects one block from each of the city's election districts. Staff members go there and interview all residents they can find. The key part here is they're selecting one block from each district. So it's like we took the city and we divided it into districts, and then we selected one block from each district. When you pull from each group, that's stratified sampling. So this is definitely stratified because one block in each district was chosen. There might be bias though because people might not choose to open the door or may not be home. That's non-response bias, people who are choosing not to respond. Also, if you go during work hours and people are at work, you're maybe not getting the opinion of the working class. That's called undercoverage. Both of those are different types of bias that might occur. Another example with the same stuff. Again, we're looking for the sampling method and any potential bias. State police set up a roadblock to estimate the percentage of cars with up-to-date registration, insurance, and safety inspection stickers. They usually find problems in about 10% of the cars they stop. So they set up one roadblock on one road. So the only people they're surveying are the people that are on that road. This is a perfect example of convenience sampling. That one roadblock is put up and only people that are on the road at that time are stopped. This is obviously creating bias because people who don't use that road won't be represented. Again, this is undercoverage. You're leaving off a large population. Dairy inspectors visit farms unannounced and take samples of the milk to test for contamination. If the milk is found to contain dirt, antibiotics, or other foreign matter, the milk will be destroyed and the farm re-inspected until purity is restored. So this, they're picking a farm and they're showing up. This is your basic type of sampling. It's a simple random sample, or SRS, because the inspectors randomly selected a farm and went and sampled that farm. This is the type of problem that there is no bias that's present. They sampled randomly, they showed up, they tested, they're done. Prior to a mayoral election, a newspaper conducted a poll. The paper surveyed a random sample of registered voters, stratified. There's a key word. We are stratifying here. We're breaking into groups based on political party, age, sex, and area of residence. This poll predicted that Amabo would win the election with 52% of the votes. The newspaper, however, was wrong. Amabo lost and only got 46% of the votes. Do you think the newspaper's faulty prediction is more likely to be a result of bias or sampling error? This is the case where the faulty prediction is probably due to sampling error. The method used was perfectly fine, but because the people were chosen randomly from the groups might not have represented the entire population. So the people that they surveyed, they may have had a high opinion of him, but maybe the overall population didn't. So the survey results differed from the population results. So this is one where probably sampling error was an issue, because that was too many different when they stratified by political party, age, sex, and area of residence, you're breaking them apart into too many groups, so you're not getting a good representation at that point. Some people have been complaining that the children's playground at Municipal Park is too small and is in need of repair. Managers of the park decided to survey city residents to see if they believe the playground should be rebuilt. So what they did was they handed out surveys to parents who bring their children to the park. Describe possible biases here. So the people that they are surveying are the people who go to the park and use the park on a regular basis. These are people that enjoy it. Obviously, these are people that feel that a better, newer playground would be great. So what's the issue there? They didn't survey everybody else. This is definitely bias. They're only handing out surveys to those people who use the park. So those people, all of the results will be, yes, please rebuild it, please repair it. There are lots of people in the city that maybe don't use the park, and so their opinions are not being represented. This is definitely a convenient sample, and you have undercoverage because not all opinions are represented. Maybe they don't want to use tax dollars to do the park because they don't use the park. So you want to make sure that you're getting a good sample and a good representation of the population. So we're going to look at a couple of questions and determine if there's any bias. If you think the question is biased, indicate how or propose a better question. So the first question simply says, do you think high school students should be required to wear uniforms? That question, people are simply going to answer yes or no. There's no words that have any emotion attached to it. It's just a simple yes or no question. So this, absolutely, this question is unbiased. There are no issues with this question at all. Given humanity's great tradition of exploration, do you favor continued funding for spaceflight? This is what I refer to as a loaded question. This first part right here, given humanity's great tradition of exploration, those are words that are meant to get you emotionally involved. Okay? You're forced to think about, wow, we've done a lot of great things in the past. Yes, we should absolutely continue to fund for this opportunity. If that part wasn't there, it would be much more of a yes or no question. You wouldn't have anybody's emotions involved. So this is very much a biased question. If we restated it and just took off the part I highlighted and said, do you favor continued funding for space flights, then people don't feel obligated to say yes or no. They don't have that emotional connection to it like they did the first way it was worded. A manufacturing company employs 14 project managers, 48 foremen, and 377 laborers. In an effort to keep informed about any possible sources of employee discontent, management wants to conduct job satisfaction interviews with a sample of employees every month. Do you see any potential danger here? Well, if you're choosing people and you're having them sit down face to face and talk about their discontent, if I was a manager, I might not have an issue sharing my opinions. But if I was a laborer, I would have the fear that I would be fired. And so to me, face-to-face interviews can make especially those low-level laborers feel uncomfortable about sharing their real feelings because they might have a fear of being fired for being honest. So propose a sampling strategy that uses a simple random sample. A simple random sample. All we're doing is giving everybody a number and randomly choosing numbers. So, first we would assign each employee a number. Then we would either use a random number table or a calculator to select a set number of employees. What I would do differently, though, to make people feel more comfortable, is I would then have each person complete a survey that's maybe on paper or electronic so that their answers can remain anonymous, and then maybe they will feel like they can express their opinions more. Why do you think a simple random sample might not provide the best representative opinion in the company? If we do a simple random sample, and let's say we choose 15 people, and we end up with 5 project managers, 5 foremen, and 5 laborers. Look at the percentages there. 5 out of 14 project managers, but 5 out of 377 laborers. We're missing a lot of laborers' opinions. You should always have more laborers in your sample than you should project managers, because there's more of them in the population. Your sample needs to be the same percentages as the population. And so, with a simple random sample, you might end up with 5 managers and 5 laborers, but the population doesn't have an equal amount of managers and laborers. It obviously has much more laborers in the group. So we're going to continue this example. So we've established that simple random sample is bad. So then what in this case would be a better sampling strategy? To me, dividing them up into their groups, managers, foremen, and laborers, divide them up. Then, instead of saying I want 5 out of each group, pick a percentage. I want 10% of each group. Or I want 20% of each group. Because then, you're going to get more laborers than you are managers and foremen in your sample. And so that's stratified sampling. So stratify them, break them up into groups, managers, foremen, laborers, and then say I want 10%, 20% from each group. That way your sample is the same percentages as the population. So listed here are the names of the project managers. Okay, so these are our 14 managers. Use a random number to select 2 people to be interviewed. Explain your method carefully. So to randomly select just out of this group of 14, we have to number each one of them. So I would just number alphabetically 1 through 14. So Barrett, then Bowman, then Chen, so on and so forth. So this way, I'm going to number Then I would pick up my graphing calculator and I would turn it on and I would hit math and go over to probability, and again I need option 5. I need that random integer. Well, my lowest number is 1 and my highest number is 14. Here's the thing. Yes, we need 2 people, but we cannot have repeats. Since you can't have repeats, don't put in a third number. Okay, you just have this part right here. Random integer 1 to 14. So I did that, and I'm going to hit enter. My first number I got was the number 13. I'm going to hit enter again. My second number was 3. So because I got 13 and 3, my 2 people are Williams at 13 and Chen with 3. If you don't allow repeats, don't ever use a third number. Only use a third number if repeats are okay. And that's the end of chapter 12.